Go back to verse 7. I want to pick up still from there, and then we're going to bounce into, because that's the springboard for where we're going. The law of an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, was a common practice in the Old Testament. It was a common practice not only in Israel, but among other nations as well, other ancient cultures as well, had that same practice. And it set a limit to punishment, in other words. It prohibited even harsher vengeance in a lot of cases. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. In other words, you took somebody's eye out, then your eye was taken out, and that was considered even or equal justice or equal punishment. In Matthew 5, and I'm not going to go there right now, read all that, but you can jot it down and go and read it later. Jesus, you remember the verse, you remember the passage where Jesus said, I say to you, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, but I say to you, don't administer hatred, for things like this. And so he replaced the law of strict retribution with the law of a very loving response to all people regardless of the circumstances. In other words, do I believe in capital punishment? Absolutely. I absolutely believe in capital punishment. If it's beyond any reason, I do say this, there need to be some stipulations where it has to be beyond any reasonable doubt whatsoever. Because I do know there have been innocent people who've been executed before. Or at least who were innocent of the crime they were accused of anyway. Innocent people who spent time in jail before. We know one who came here for a time, who served 9 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. And then after 9 years in prison, the truth came out and he was released. So we know there's innocent people who are incarcerated and sometimes put to death for things they didn't. So I do stipulate that it has to be beyond, it should absolutely be beyond any reasonable doubt. But I do believe in capital punishment. That I think it's a necessary thing. But that is not, capital punishment is justice that the Bible established, that is justice administered by an authoritative or a government authority or someone who's been authorized by God to do so. It's not us taking the law in our own hands and us doing the vengeance ourselves. Although sometimes we'd like to do that. Sometimes we feel like, I wish I didn't have to act like a Christian, But we know that according to the Word of God, that God has a set pattern, set way of doing these things. And so, it was, and Jesus replaced that means of retribution and vengeance, and he said that you respond in love. Love your enemies. So that's sometimes much easier said than done, but that's the command. That's the directive. To love your enemies. And do good to them who spite you, he says. So in other words, when someone has done something even heinous or wicked against us, as much as what it hurts, as much as what it may seem to us unforgivable, we still, if we are professing the name of Christ, we have got to respond and react to in a measure of kindness. Now, that doesn't mean if someone raped and murdered your mother, for instance, that doesn't mean I'm going to go hug them around the neck and say, well, I love you, bless your heart. I know that you were just, you're lost. No, it doesn't mean that. You don't even have to see them necessarily. But at some point in my life, I'm going to have to find a place of forgiveness, a place of dealing with it properly and processing that grief and that hurt and everything else. Like I said, it's easier said than done, but with God, all things are possible. And we already know of testimonies in cases where similar things like that have happened, and a member or some members of the family will go to the perpetrator and actually see them in jail and actually administer forgiveness to them. And some even became, unimaginably, became friends after things because of the loving compassion and forgiveness of God. Now, to the natural mind, to the finite natural mind, that just seems off the chain crazy, And people have been called crazy for showing that kind of love and forgiveness. But Jesus directs us to love our enemy. Why? Because if we love our enemy, we'll pray for them. And look, it stands to reason if someone does act like that, obviously they need God. Obviously, before they leave this world, especially if they've been put on death row, before they leave this world, they need to find peace with God. And so those things are, are things that Jesus set in action. But I want to qualify all that by saying this. In this ancient setting of Adonai Bezek, He recognized in that verse what happened to him was fitting because he had already done this to 70 others at least anyway. So he recognized it. He says in verse 7 again, he said, I 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. I'm reaping what I sow. I'm reaping the results of that. Let me say this. You may not cut off thumbs and toes of people, but you will reap what you sow, whatever that is. That is an established law that we cannot get away from. At some point, at some juncture somewhere, it doesn't mean that God hasn't forgiven you. Because some people think, well, I got saved now, so I ain't got to worry about it, none of that stuff. Well, you ain't got to worry about your past being held against you as far as God's concerned, but there are some consequences of your past that may come back. That you, because of reaping what you sow.